Welcome to our first IJOC webinar. In our first webinar, we would like to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on our sport and the measures taken to mitigate the risk of the competitions regarding COVID-19. We're very happy to have Sabrina Ibanez, Secretary General of the FEI, and Catherine Bollon in this webinar.
Thank you, Willem. Yes, it's a pleasure to be here. Yes, so I am Sabrina Ibanez. I've been Secretary General of the FEI now for 5 years. I'm at home right now, as many of us are, because of COVID-19. We have 60% of our employees are on partial unemployment, and as you can see, it does look kind of homey here. I have a Salvadorian background, and that's why behind me I have a painting of a very well-known Salvadorian artist showing the beautiful landscape of my home country. So indeed, yes, COVID-19 has had a devastating effect, of course, not only on society, but on the sport, and has made planning for the FEI, our organizers, athletes, owners, and officials extremely challenging.
Catherine, may I ask you, what are you doing at the FEI?
Good morning, Willem. I work in the legal department at the FEI, and I look after athletes' health. Helping the medical committee develop projects. So now that we have this COVID-19 pandemic, then my role is to implement the FEI's COVID-19 policy as smoothly as possible.
Sabrina, can you tell us about the impact of COVID-19 on the equestrian sport in general and on the FEI more specific? For instance, the number of competitions and how you manage that.
Yeah, so indeed, it's been very challenging this period. We have over 3,000 events in the FEI calendar that have been canceled, with 956 events in jumping due to COVID-19. So that's quite a number.
Yeah.
So in order to come up with recommendations concerning the FEI calendar, as you know, I am responsible as Secretary General for the FEI calendar. The board asked that we set up 8 different calendar task forces to review date clash issues of postponed events, rescheduling of them, and to facilitate the organization of new events in the FEI calendar. So the jumping calendar task force, which I chair, is composed of the 2 vice presidents. So it represents the North America, Asia. We also have on this task force the representative of the EEF, which is the European representative. We have an athlete representative and an organizer representative. And in addition to that, we have the administrator of the calendar. We have someone from IT that's there too, because sometimes there are some IT issues that need to be discussed. And of course, legal representation as well. So one of the things that we did, and of course we reviewed this with the jumping committee too, was to look at deadlines. How could we facilitate and make it less bureaucratic for new events to come into the calendar? So we changed the deadlines, which are in the rules, and we got this approved by the board because it would require a derogation of our rules. So for instance, when it comes to the high-level events, the CSI 5 stars and 4 stars, as well as the CSIOs for 5 stars, 4 stars, and 3 stars, we maintained it to 12 weeks in advance because it's really needed to be kept as is. The receipt of calendar, 10 weeks in advance. But when it comes to 3 stars, and when it comes to team events for young riders, juniors, ponies, and children, there we reduced it. We reduced it to 8 weeks in advance. And when a national federation or an organizer does put in the request, they would need to submit to us as well at the same time, in order not to lose any time, the draft schedule, so we can start working on that schedule. All other events, however, we really facilitated, and we just kept it to 4 weeks.
Okay.
4 weeks, the deadlines, and 4 weeks, the draft schedule. Now, we have been working on, and I know you will be discussing this later on with Catherine Bollon, who is in charge of athlete services, but we have developed with the medical committee a risk assessment, a COVID-19 risk assessment and a mitigation plan. This document needs to be returned to the FEI 10 days for all events, 10 days before the definite entries. Okay. So that is one of the things that we have done in order to, let's say, make it a little less bureaucratic and stimulate the market so that there are more events coming into the calendar.
Yeah.
Today, I'm happy to say that we have 826 jumping events that are still in the calendar for the rest of the year. So we are beginning to see an increase. And if you'd like, William, I can share with you and the officials what this looks like on a monthly basis and in what regions.
Yeah, that would be nice.
So what we're talking about is for this month, for the month of June, which is, we're getting towards the end. But it's nice to see that we have 22 events in the calendar. Okay, it's not humongous, but it is something. 17 of those are taking place here in Europe, and 5 of those in Group 4, which is the North America and Caribbean. But basically, we know that we're talking really about Canada, Mexico, and the US. The rest of the world, there's nothing.
No.
When we move on to July, things are getting a little bit better. We have 112 events in the calendar, with almost 100 in Europe, which is good.
Yeah.
We start seeing events taking place in Group 3, and in Group 4 we have 7 events, and in Group 9, which is Africa, we have 1 event. And as we progress, we see that in August there's 109 events, in September there's 157 events, October, there we're really seeing that people are very encouraged. We have 181 events. So it is getting better, and it is beginning to spread throughout the different regions. So that's a good thing.
Okay, it's a big challenge with this crisis management, but you have to do. And it's a huge impact, as I conclude. But you also see that if there's a crisis, some things are getting more easier to arrange just for the benefit of the sport.
That's
and you're making a very good contribution to that. So that's very great. Big compliment.
Thank you. It's challenging, but we do our best.
Yes.
What is also challenging is in June, we do have a number of events, and in July as well. It's finding officials for the foreign, for example, the foreign officials that are required. So the jumping department is very busy reaching out to officials, seeing whether they are able to travel. We also are finding difficulties with flights being booked already because everybody's getting excited about the holidays. So not necessarily officials. So it's difficult to find travel arrangements as well for the different officials. But we're working hand in hand and trying to find the best solutions for our organizers, national federations, officials, and of course our athletes who really need to get back and compete.
Catherine, to make competition possible again in the FEI, the FEI introduced a risk assessment tool. Can you tell us something about that?
As any sporting body, the FEI has to resolve a double equation, which is allowing competitions to start and making sure that we contribute to the attempts made all over the world to control the pandemic. What we have done is that we obtained from WHO a tool, which WHO is the World Health Organization, and they have developed a tool to help sport organizers assess the level of risk that an event they are planning would pose in terms of COVID-19. So it's called the risk assessment tool, and it's an Excel document with several sheets where basically organizers answer questions. And by answering the questions, they trigger the formulas in the sheet to bring an overall score, which is telling then how much risk the event may be posing in terms of COVID-19 transmission.
Okay. Is it very complex or?
It's very easy to use.
Okay.
Some organizers, we've received feedback already. The terminology in the document is very public health oriented. So the sport world is not familiar with the terminology. For example, the term mass gathering is used, but it means sporting event in this context. And it's really just answers to give to questions about the preparations which the OC is making to plan for the event. So what may feel overwhelming is that by seeing the questions, OCs will realize, although I'm sure they already know, but they will see all the level of preparation that they need at least to think about as appropriate in their country. But it is very simple technically to fill in. And in my view, since OCs are anyway preparing their events in the light of the legislation in their country with regard to COVID-19, then actually going through the questions should not feel unfamiliar to them. So they should just not be put off by the terminology if they are not used to it.
And as we are an official club, what do you expect from officials in this process?
So as you know, we're applying a policy which has been adopted a few weeks ago. And in the policy, we have clearly defined everybody's role and obligations. And when it comes to officials, their role is limited in that we do not expect them to make a full report on the measures that are applied at an event. They are not responsible for these measures. They are not responsible for enforcing the measures. What they are responsible for is, first of all, to comply with the measures at the event, obviously. Mm-hmm. And then if they have feedback for us, to send us this feedback. And they can do this using their event reports, which we have now updated, the online reports and the paper reports, with a block on COVID-19 with very simple questions, which are basically no issues, issue to report, any suggestions. Mm-hmm. So it is not a full assessment of what is being done at the event.
Okay, thank you. If you look at our job, for instance, when you're a judge or a steward, you work in specific areas at the venue. If you look, for instance, at the jury box, a lot of people are there. The music is there. The announcer is there. Sometimes the jury is there. A lot of people, very crowded. Do you have suggestions or best practices already? How you can handle that?
Yes, so when it comes to COVID-19, we want to avoid transmission, and that's done in two main ways. One is social distancing, meaning that people don't come too close to each other. And the second one is hygiene. So the same principles are going to apply in the jury box. So to start with, items should not be shared. Hand sanitizers should be available so that if items have to be shared, then hands are cleaned before and after using the items. Mm-hmm. Then in terms of social distancing, some OCs will be able to put a plexiglass or a heavy plastic divider between people. And if that is not possible, and if people cannot stay about 2 meters away from each other, then they will need to wear masks as long as they are in the jury box. And of course, the organizer will need to make sure that only the very necessary people are in the jury box. So anyone who doesn't absolutely have to be there will have to not be in.
Okay, well, that's important. So the organizer plays a role in that. Okay, can you tell me something more about the process, about the risk assessment and things probably you already have received because competition are starting now?
Yes, we have received several risk assessments. Mm-hmm. At the moment, we're talking mainly about international competition, but that are happening in a fairly local setting. Mm-hmm. Which means that participants from other countries were not expected, a small number of participants and so on. So overall, we've received risk assessments where the events scored quite low in terms of COVID-19 risk. Mm-hmm. What we actually ask organizers to send us is the Excel sheet which they have filled in and a list of the measures they will apply at the event. For example, a copy of the paper which they will circulate to all the participants to tell them what is into place at the event. So depending on the OCs, some could understand immediately what we expect of them. And of course, most of the events that are restarting now are in Europe. So we're talking about countries where the local authorities have issued some strong rules or recommendations. So most of the time we can see that the OCs are fairly well prepared. We made a few suggestions, but they were only suggestions. What we really want is to see that the risk assessment has been made and that measures have been put into place. But we know that in every country, OCs have to follow the law in any case. So we do not substitute to the law. We just want to make sure the same reasoning has been made. So far it has been going well. Some OCs had trouble really understanding what we expected of them. They thought there were more requirements than there actually are. So we're in the process of issuing an FAQ for them so that they really understand how far the requirements go. It's not really that we have additional requirements from what would be in the local law. It's just that we need a reasoning and we need to make sure that they think about everything. So some OCs have been really well prepared. Some needed a bit of guidance, but so far we found that things are going well.
You didn't cancel the show because the risk assessment was too poor.
No, you see, in the COVID-19 policy issued by the FEI, the sanction that an OC could receive, the cancelling of a show, would be if the OC has not provided documents.
Okay.
Now, when we receive the documents, our purpose is not to go through every single measure, because we know that the OC is following the local legislation already. We're not the legislator. We just want to make sure that everything is in order. So we browse through the risk assessments. If we see a red flag, we're going to raise it with the OC and discuss it with the OC. But so far, this has not happened. So as long as we receive the documents and unless we identify a big issue, it's good to go.
Okay, thank you. And then there are a lot of rules and measurements taken. If somebody doesn't apply to those rules, is there a role for an official then to maintain the order, or?
No, not in terms of COVID-19 measures. Basically what happens is that the OC will decide on the measures that apply at their event, and the OC enforces these measures. And they have informed the participants that complying with the measures is a condition for being accepted on the venue. So if somebody does not want to comply with the measures, then someone from the OC will have to explain this person, sir, madam, please comply, otherwise you cannot stay on the venue. And the FEI official is not in charge of this job.
Okay, those were the questions. Do you have any message for the officials at the end that you want to share with them?
Yes, I think it's important that officials understand that if there is something they don't understand, they must reach out to us. Because obviously there's a big gap between an international federation issuing texts that feel a bit maybe cold and in a bit of a technical or legal language, which is necessary, and the way it is experienced on site. But we can really explain everything. We will take any suggestions. So we need to have an open line of communications with the officials and with the OCs. And obviously, people will be stressed about the COVID-19 measures and the risk of COVID-19. So we need to be understanding and compassionate and patient with each other. And that really helps getting the communication through. If officials see problems, they can raise them with the OCs in a diplomatic way, of course, and then they can raise them with us, and then we can continue the discussion with the OCs. So it's not about judging, sanctioning, it's about working together so that our sport can be trusted by authorities around the world, government authorities, to resume as soon as possible.
Okay, Sabrina, these are hard times and you have to take tough decisions. Could you give us an example of a tough decision that you had to make?
Well, so, I mean, it is quite complicated. And if we'll talk about championships, because these days it's all I'm dealing with a lot now, since most of the calendar date clash issues have been resolved. What we're really talking about is championships. Now, you may have seen, and the officials may have seen, that last week, the canceled European Dressage Young Riders, Juniors, and Pony Championships were allocated to an organizer, a national federation in Hungary. And this stimulated a lot of interest from other organizers for jumping, as you can imagine. So all of a sudden we had on our hands 3 different formal applications to host these championships now for the canceled one in Vilamura. You may recall that Vilamura was going to host these championships. So we are now in discussions, and we will be deciding very shortly, next week at the very latest, about the rescheduling of these championships. Of course, we need the input from the Jumping Temporary Committee. And just, this is really hot off the press for you, is that there will be a survey that goes out today, which we have asked the EF to facilitate, sent out to all the national federations in Europe, to see, one, whether they're interested in rescheduling these canceled championships. Two, have they been able to train during this period? Is the date realistic? And if they would be interested in actually participating with individuals or teams at these championships. But the concern of the jumping department is that we really need to ensure that these athletes have prepared, and we need to look out for the safety of both the equine athlete and the human athlete. So those are some things that we have been dealing with. Another thing, which I'm sure is not going to be a surprise to anybody, is the issue of the European Senior Jumping Championships. The moment we found out, and I'm just saying minutes after we found out the dates of the Olympic Games, we, the FEI, we immediately contacted Budapest, who had been allocated the jumping, dressage, and para-dressage and driving championships in Budapest for next year, for these European championships. And we asked them whether it would be possible to just continue to host these championships. And they basically said that they could only move it by 1 week, I think it was what they said, so that no, they couldn't, so it would clash. So here we had a big dilemma on our hands. So we sought the input of the EEF, of course, we sought the input of the Jumping Technical Committee and the input of the Jumping Calendar Task Force before making a proposal to the board. So basically what we thought about was, would it be possible to hold these championships next year? There was concern that there wasn't enough horsepower to go around to compete in the Olympic Games and the European Championships. There was also concern about the dates. When would be the most appropriate dates in view of the Nations Cup, the Division 1 and the EF Series, and the final, naturally. There was also concern about national Olympic committees and national federations not having the funding appropriate to be able to send teams and or athletes to the Olympic Games and the Europeans. And in addition to that, there was also discussions about the fact that when we did allocate the championships to Budapest in 2019, there was only one applicant, and it was Budapest for these important championships. And then in addition to that, up to date, just for information, we haven't received a formal application from a national federation saying we would like to host these championships. There have been talks, there have been all sorts of discussions, but there hasn't been yet a formal request to host these championships from an organizer / national federation. However, things have a way of changing during COVID-19. And 2 days ago, I believe, yeah, on Wednesday, there was the EF board meeting, and there were further discussions regarding these senior championships. And next week, when we have the board, which is the board spring meeting, if you want, which will take place on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday of next week, we will receive an update by the EEF as to what the situation is, what the position is, and any thoughts going forward. So it's still pretty, I mean, on the table-ish, if I can say something like that. So we shall see, and of course we will reach out to everybody and communicate as soon as possible. But it is challenging. I mean, it's just one big puzzle, this whole thing. So we're trying to do our best, and I know everybody understands that.
Thank you very much, because it's very hard to make decisions in these times under these conditions. And again, you're doing a nice job. Also,
thank you. And a big thank you to all the officials out there. We know it's not easy for you. And we are, all of us want to get back to seeing the sport flourish and to seeing you also there. So thank you very much, and thank you for your support.
Of course, first of all, I'd like to thank Sabrina and Katrien for the time you've invested in this webinar. We also had a pre-webinar to discuss a little bit the topics. So I can conclude that the FEI is handling the crisis in a professional way, and that the risk of starting competitions again is taken very seriously. Let's all cooperate to make it work and see how we as officials can contribute in mitigating the risk and making the sport possible again together with the FEI. Thank you very much.